Julius Caesar, the man, the myth, the conspiracy. The city sleeps. Torchlight flickers against ancient stone. The narrow streets of Rome are quiet now, but beneath the silence lies a story soaked in ambition, power, betrayal, and blood. For more than 2,000 years, one name has echoed through history louder than almost any other. Julius Caesar, general, statesman, conqueror, dictator, legend. Even today, his name survives in titles of power across the world. From Kaiser in Germany to Tsar in Russia, rulers long after his death borrowed echoes of his name to strengthen their own authority. But who was Julius Caesar really? Was he a visionary leader who saved a dying republic? A brilliant military genius who transformed Rome forever? Or was he a dangerous politician whose hunger for power destroyed the very system he claimed to serve? The answer depends on who is telling the story. To some Romans, Caesar was a hero. To others, he was a tyrant. And to the men who eventually surrounded him in the Senate House on the Ides of March, he had become something even more dangerous, a threat. His assassination remains one of the most famous political murders in human history. The image is unforgettable. A powerful ruler entering a meeting, trusted allies standing nearby, hidden blades beneath their robes. Then violence, sudden, brutal, historic. Yet the murder itself is only part of the story. Because long before the daggers were drawn, Julius Caesar had already begun transforming Rome. He changed the rules. He changed the balance of power. And in doing so, he created enemies who believed the Republic could only survive if he died. But Caesar's story is more than an assassination. It is the story of a young aristocrat born into a republic on the edge of crisis, a politician who mastered public opinion, a general who conquered vast territories, a writer who carefully shaped his own legend, a man who crossed boundaries others feared to approach, and perhaps most importantly, a figure who blurred the line between history and myth. The Rome Caesar entered as a young man was already changing. The Republic had expanded across the Mediterranean. Its armies were victorious. Its wealth was immense. Yet beneath the surface, the foundations were cracking. Political corruption was growing. Violence increasingly influenced elections. Powerful families competed relentlessly for influence. Generals commanded armies whose loyalty often belonged more to their commanders than to the state itself. The Republic looked strong, but many Romans sensed danger approaching. Into this unstable world stepped Julius Caesar. At first, there was little reason to believe he would become the most famous Roman who ever lived. His family possessed noble ancestry, but they were not the wealthiest nor the most powerful in Rome. Others seemed destined for greatness before him. Others commanded greater resources. Others possessed stronger political networks. Yet Caesar had something that many of his rivals lacked: ambition without limits. He understood something fundamental about power. Power was not simply inherited. It could be built, created, expanded, and if necessary, seized. Over the coming decades, Caesar would rise through Roman politics with remarkable speed. He would form alliances with some of the most influential men in the Republic. He would lead armies into distant lands. He would conquer Gaul and become one of the most celebrated generals in Roman history. He would challenge the authority of the Senate, cross the Rubicon River, defeat his enemies in civil war, and ultimately become dictator for life. But with every victory, new fears emerged. The more powerful Caesar became, the more people wondered the same question. Had Rome gained its greatest leader, or was it witnessing the birth of a king? For centuries, Romans had hated the very idea of monarchy. Their republic had been founded after overthrowing kings. The memory remained deeply embedded in Roman culture. No Roman wanted to hear the word king. Yet many began to fear that Caesar's growing authority pointed in exactly that direction. Those fears would eventually lead to conspiracy, and conspiracy would lead to murder. But murder would not save the Republic. In many ways, it would destroy it. Because when Caesar fell beneath the knives of his assassins, Rome did not return to stability. Instead, it descended into even greater chaos. The men who killed Caesar believed they were defending freedom. History would judge whether they succeeded. Tonight, we journey into the life of the man whose death changed the course of civilization. A story of triumph and tragedy, of politics and warfare, of loyalty and betrayal. A story where history and legend intertwine until they become almost impossible to separate. This is the story of Julius Caesar, the man, the myth, the conspiracy, and it begins in Rome, 100 years before the birth of an empire. Chapter 2. The Boy from Rome. Long before Julius Caesar commanded vast armies, long before he crossed the Rubicon, long before senators whispered his name with fear and admiration, he was simply a boy growing up in Rome, a city unlike any the world had ever seen. The year was 100 BC. Rome was already the dominant power of the Mediterranean. Its legions had conquered kingdoms. Its merchants traded across distant seas. Its politicians governed territories stretching far beyond Italy. To many outsiders, Rome appeared unstoppable, but beneath its impressive facade, deep tensions were growing. The Republic was becoming a victim of its own success. Wealth flowed into the city from conquered lands. Power concentrated in the hands of a small elite. Political rivalries grew increasingly bitter. Violence became more common. And ambitious men began competing for influence on a scale Rome had never experienced before. Into this world, on July 12 or 13, according to most traditional accounts, Gaius Julius Caesar was born. His family belonged to the ancient Julian clan, one of Rome's oldest aristocratic houses. The Julii claimed a remarkable ancestry. According to family tradition, they traced their lineage back to Iulus, the son of the Trojan hero Aeneas, and through Aeneas they claimed descent from Venus herself, the Roman goddess of love and beauty. Whether anyone truly believed these stories is difficult to know, but in Rome, ancestry mattered. Noble families often connected themselves to legendary figures. Such claims provided prestige, status, and political advantage. For young Caesar, these stories would become part of his identity. He grew up believing he belonged to a family destined for greatness. Yet, there was a problem. The Julian family possessed noble blood, but they were not among the richest families in Rome, nor were they the most politically influential. Their reputation exceeded their actual power. In a city dominated by fierce competition, that distinction mattered. Caesar would need more than ancestry to achieve greatness. He would need talent, determination, and extraordinary ambition. His father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, served as a magistrate and provincial governor. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, came from a respected and influential family. Ancient writers frequently praised Aurelia's intelligence, discipline, and character. Many historians believe she played a crucial role in shaping her son's early development. In Roman society, education was serious business. The sons of noble families were expected to prepare for public life from an early age. Young Caesar studied literature, rhetoric, philosophy, and law. He learned how to speak persuasively, how to argue effectively, how to command attention. These skills would later become some of his greatest weapons, because Caesar understood something many generals never fully grasped. Words could be as powerful as swords. Rome itself served as a classroom. Every day, Caesar witnessed political debates in the Forum. He watched ambitious politicians compete for influence. He observed the rituals, ceremonies, and traditions that governed Roman life, and he learned how power truly worked, not from books, but from experience. Yet while Caesar was growing up, the Republic faced growing instability. One of the most important divisions in Roman politics involved two broad factions. The Optimates favored preserving the traditional authority of the Senate and aristocratic elite. The Populares often sought support from ordinary citizens and used popular reforms to build political influence. The conflict between these groups increasingly shaped Roman politics. Caesar's family connections placed him closer to the Populares. This association would eventually put him in grave danger. During Caesar's youth, a powerful military leader named Gaius Marius dominated Roman politics. Marius was not only one of Rome's greatest generals, he was also connected to Caesar's family through marriage. For a time, Marius stood among the most influential men in Rome. But power in the Republic was never secure. Another ambitious leader soon emerged. His name was Lucius Cornelius Sulla. The rivalry between Marius and Sulla plunged Rome into a brutal struggle for control. Political disagreements escalated into civil conflict. Armies marched against fellow Romans. Citizens were forced to choose sides. The Republic's traditions began breaking apart. Young Caesar watched as violence entered Roman politics in ways previous generations could scarcely imagine. Then came one of the darkest periods in Roman history. After gaining control of Rome, Sulla launched a campaign against his enemies. Lists of condemned individuals appeared throughout the city. Those named could be hunted and killed. Their property confiscated. Their families ruined. These infamous proscriptions spread fear across the Republic, and Caesar soon found himself in danger. By this point, Caesar had married Cornelia, the daughter of an ally connected to Marius. To Sulla, this made Caesar politically suspect. The young aristocrat received a direct order: divorce your wife, abandon the alliance, demonstrate loyalty to the new regime. For many Romans, compliance would have been the safest choice. The consequences of refusal could be fatal, but Caesar refused. The decision was extraordinary. He was still young. He possessed little political power. Sulla controlled Rome. Yet Caesar chose defiance. As a result, he became a target. His inheritance was threatened. His position weakened. And according to later accounts, he was forced into hiding. Friends and relatives reportedly intervened on his behalf, persuading Sulla to spare him. The dictator eventually relented. But ancient sources preserve a remarkable story. After granting Caesar mercy, Sulla supposedly warned his supporters. "In that young man," he said, "there were many Mariuses." Whether the quote is entirely accurate remains uncertain, but it reflects a truth that became increasingly obvious. Even experienced politicians recognized Caesar's potential. There was something unusual about him, something dangerous, something destined for greatness. Surviving this crisis became one of the defining experiences of Caesar's youth. He learned that political power could disappear overnight. He learned that enemies could become deadly. And he learned that survival often depended on courage, adaptability, and timing. These lessons would remain with him for the rest of his life. After leaving Rome, Caesar began military service in Asia Minor. For ambitious young aristocrats, military experience was essential. A successful political career often began with achievements in the field. Caesar quickly distinguished himself. Ancient accounts describe acts of bravery that earned recognition from his commanders. His confidence grew, his reputation expanded, and his ambitions became even larger. Yet military service was only the beginning. Caesar was not content merely to serve others. He intended to lead, to shape events, to rise higher than anyone expected. The boy born into a respected but modest branch of Rome's aristocracy had already survived political persecution. He had refused to bend under pressure. He had witnessed civil conflict firsthand. And he had begun building the skills that would later transform him into one of history's most famous figures. The road ahead remained uncertain. Many obstacles still stood before him. Powerful rivals would emerge. Dangerous alliances would form. Wars would reshape the Republic, but the foundations had already been laid. The future conqueror of Gaul, the future dictator of Rome, the future target of one of history's most famous conspiracies, was no longer merely a boy. He was becoming Julius Caesar, and Rome was beginning to notice. In the next chapter, Caesar takes his first real steps into the brutal world of Roman politics, where ambition, influence, and public image could determine the fate of an entire republic. Chapter 3: First Steps in Politics. By the time Julius Caesar returned to Rome, he had already learned one of the republic's most important lessons. Power was never given. It was taken, sometimes through skill, sometimes through alliances, and sometimes through sheer determination. The city he returned to was still the beating heart of the Mediterranean world. Millions of people across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East lived under Roman influence. Yet, despite its immense power, the Republic remained deeply unstable. Political competition had become fierce. Families fought endlessly for prestige. Senators maneuvered behind closed doors. Public assemblies erupted into heated confrontations, and ambitious young men dreamed of becoming the next great leader of Rome. Caesar was one of them, but unlike many of his rivals, he lacked enormous wealth. He lacked a powerful military command, and he lacked the political machine needed to guarantee success. If he wanted to rise, he would have to create opportunities for himself. From an early stage, Caesar demonstrated a remarkable understanding of public image. He knew that politics was not merely about laws and offices. It was also about perception. People needed to notice you, remember you, talk about you. In many ways, Caesar understood political branding long before such a concept existed. His speeches attracted attention. His appearance was carefully maintained. His confidence stood out. Even among Rome's ambitious elite, Caesar seemed determined to be noticed. As he climbed the traditional ladder of Roman public offices, known as the Times Cursus Honorum, each step brought new responsibilities and greater visibility. The system was designed to prepare politicians for leadership. Young men advanced through a sequence of offices, gaining experience along the way. For Caesar, every office became another opportunity to build influence. His first major breakthrough came when he was elected quaestor. Though not the highest position, it marked his official entry into the governing structure of the Republic. For many politicians, this office represented a routine administrative duty. For Caesar, it became a platform. He treated every position as a stepping stone toward something larger. Yet advancement in Rome required more than talent. It required alliances. Roman politics operated through networks of relationships. Friendships, family ties, favors, marriages, and debts all played crucial roles. A politician who stood alone rarely survived for long. Caesar understood this reality better than most. He carefully cultivated supporters. He forged connections with influential families. He built relationships across different political factions. Most importantly, he developed a reputation for generosity. Public games, festivals, and spectacles were powerful political tools. Roman citizens loved entertainment. They admired leaders who appeared willing to spend money for the public good. Caesar embraced this strategy enthusiastically. He sponsored lavish events, organized public celebrations, and financed impressive displays designed to capture attention. The problem was simple. He could not actually afford many of these expenses. To fund his political ambitions, Caesar accumulated enormous debts. Friends worried. Critics mocked him. Some believed he was recklessly destroying his future. But Caesar viewed debt differently. He saw it as an investment, a temporary burden on the path to greater power. If he could continue advancing, future opportunities would outweigh present risks. It was a dangerous gamble, yet time and again, Caesar seemed willing to take risks others avoided. His growing popularity did not please everyone. Many conservative senators viewed him with suspicion. They feared politicians who appealed directly to the people. To them, Caesar's popularity seemed threatening. His charisma attracted attention. His ambition appeared limitless. And his willingness to challenge traditional expectations made many uneasy. Still, Caesar continued moving upward. One of the most significant moments in his early political career came when he was elected Pontifex Maximus. This position made him the chief priest of Rome's state religion. The office carried immense prestige. Its holder supervised important religious ceremonies and enjoyed lifelong influence. Winning the election shocked many observers. Caesar faced powerful competitors, more experienced rivals, men who appeared far better positioned to succeed. Yet once again, he prevailed. The victory transformed his standing within Roman society. He was no longer simply an ambitious young politician. He had become one of the Republic's most visible public figures. His influence expanded rapidly, and so did concerns about his ambitions. As Caesar's career progressed, another quality became increasingly apparent. He possessed an extraordinary ability to connect with different groups. The wealthy could admire his sophistication. Soldiers respected his courage. Ordinary citizens appreciated his generosity. Political allies valued his loyalty. Even opponents often acknowledged his intelligence. Few Roman politicians managed to appeal to such a broad audience. This versatility became one of Caesar's greatest strengths. Yet the Republic itself continued drifting toward instability. Economic inequality widened. Political violence increased. Rival factions accused one another of corruption and betrayal. The Senate struggled to maintain authority. Many Romans sensed that the old system was no longer functioning as intended. Into this atmosphere stepped a new generation of ambitious leaders. Among them were two men whose futures would become inseparably linked to Caesar's own. One was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known to history as Pompey the Great, a celebrated military commander whose victories had made him one of the most admired men in Rome. The other was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in the Republic, a financier whose fortune seemed almost limitless. Each possessed strengths Caesar lacked. Pompey had military glory. Crassus had money. Caesar had political talent and growing popularity. Separately, they were influential. Together, they could become unstoppable. But before that alliance emerged, Caesar achieved another critical milestone. In 59 BC, he was elected consul. The consulship was the highest elected office in the Roman Republic. Two consuls served simultaneously, sharing executive authority. For ambitious politicians, reaching this position represented the pinnacle of public achievement. Caesar had done it. The young man once hunted during Sulla's regime now stood at the top of Roman politics. Yet even this success failed to satisfy him. Many politicians would have viewed the consulship as the culmination of a career. Caesar viewed it as a beginning. He was already looking beyond Rome, beyond elections, beyond traditional political advancement. He wanted something greater, something capable of securing wealth, glory, and influence on a scale few Romans had ever achieved. He believed the Republic's future belonged to bold leaders, and he intended to be the boldest of them all. Soon, circumstances would bring Caesar together with Pompey and Crassus. Their alliance would reshape Roman politics. It would undermine old rivalries, create new opportunities, and set Caesar on the path toward unprecedented power. The Republic was entering a new era, and at its center stood three ambitious men, each hungry for influence, each determined to dominate Rome. History would remember their partnership as the First Triumvirate, and it would change everything. Chapter 4, the First Triumvirate. Rome had always feared the concentration of power. For centuries, the Republic's institutions were designed to prevent any single individual from becoming too dominant. Authority was divided. Offices were shared. Terms were limited. The system depended on balance. But by the middle of the 1st century BC, that balance was beginning to crack. Political gridlock paralyzed the Senate. Rival factions blocked one another at every turn. Ambitious leaders found themselves frustrated by a system increasingly incapable of addressing Rome's growing challenges. It was in this environment that three powerful men made a decision that would alter the course of Roman history. Individually, each possessed immense influence. Together, they would become nearly unstoppable. History remembers their alliance as the First Triumvirate, but despite the famous name, it was not an official government institution. It was not created by law. It was not recognized by the Roman constitution. Instead, it was a private agreement, a political partnership forged behind the scenes by three ambitious men determined to achieve what none could accomplish alone. The first was Julius Caesar, recently elected consul, politically skilled, charismatic, and increasingly popular among the Roman people. The second was Pompey the Great, one of the most celebrated military commanders Rome had ever produced. Pompey had defeated pirates across the Mediterranean, expanded Roman influence in the East, and returned home covered in glory. His victories had made him a living legend. The third was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. His fortune was so vast that ancient writers struggled to describe its scale. Crassus possessed enormous financial power and extensive political connections. Each man had strengths. Each man had weaknesses. And each needed something from the others. Pompey wanted land and rewards for his veterans. Crassus wanted policies favorable to his financial interests. Caesar needed support to advance his ambitions and secure an important military command. The Senate often resisted their goals, but united, they could pressure the political system more effectively than any one of them could alone. And so, around 60 BC, the alliance was born. At first, many Romans failed to grasp its significance. There was no public ceremony, no official announcement, no dramatic declaration. Yet behind closed doors, the balance of power had shifted. Three of the Republic's most influential figures were now working together. The effects became visible almost immediately. As consul, Caesar pushed legislation benefiting Pompey's veterans and advancing key objectives of the alliance. Resistance emerged quickly. Conservative senators accused him of undermining traditional procedures. Debates became increasingly heated. Political tensions escalated. But Caesar pressed forward. Again and again, he demonstrated a willingness to challenge established norms when they stood in his way. Critics complained that the alliance threatened the Republic itself. Supporters argued that it simply bypassed an ineffective Senate. The truth depended largely on perspective. To Caesar and his allies, they were solving political problems. To their opponents, they were concentrating dangerous amounts of power. The alliance soon became even stronger through family ties. In a move both personal and political, Caesar arranged for his daughter Julia to marry Pompey. The marriage helped reinforce trust between the two men. By Roman standards, it was a powerful symbol of unity. Ancient sources suggest that genuine affection eventually developed between Julia and Pompey. For a time, the relationship helped stabilize the alliance. But politics and family rarely remained separate in Rome. As Caesar's influence expanded, so did concerns among his rivals. Many senators worried that the Triumvirate was gradually overshadowing the Republic's traditional institutions. Decisions increasingly seemed to revolve around the interests of 3 individuals rather than the collective authority of the Senate. Yet Caesar was not content merely to influence politics in Rome. He wanted military glory. He understood something fundamental about Roman power. Great generals often became great political leaders. Military success brought wealth, prestige, loyal soldiers, and public admiration. Without military achievements, even talented politicians could struggle to maintain influence. Caesar needed a command worthy of his ambitions. The Triumvirate helped provide one. After his consulship ended, Caesar received command of several provinces, including Cisalpine, Gaul, and Illyricum. Soon afterward, he gained authority over Transalpine Gaul as well. The assignment appeared promising, but few Romans could have predicted what would happen next. The territories north of Italy offered opportunities far beyond routine administration. They offered war, and Caesar intended to seize every advantage it presented. The command granted him something he had never possessed before: an army, not merely a temporary force, not a symbolic position, a real military command with thousands of soldiers under his authority. For Caesar, this changed everything. The ambitious politician who had spent years navigating the dangerous world of Roman elections was about to enter an entirely different arena, one where success depended on strategy, leadership, courage, and force. Yet while Caesar prepared for his future campaigns, the alliance remained intact. Pompey continued to dominate through prestige, Crassus through wealth, Caesar through political skill and growing influence. For the moment, their partnership seemed unbreakable, but hidden weaknesses already existed. The alliance depended on mutual benefit. It depended on trust. And most importantly, it depended on the personal relationships between the 3 men. If any part of that foundation weakened, the entire structure could collapse. History would eventually prove just how fragile it really was. For now, however, the Triumvirate stood at the height of its power. The Senate struggled to resist it. Opponents searched for ways to challenge it, and ordinary Romans watched as the Republic increasingly revolved around 3 extraordinary figures. But among those 3 men, one was beginning to pull ahead. While Pompey remained in Rome and Crassus focused on wealth and influence, Caesar was heading toward the frontier, toward opportunity, toward conquest, toward the war that would transform him from politician into legend. Beyond the Alps lay vast territories, inhabited by diverse tribes and kingdoms. To many Romans, these lands represented danger and uncertainty. To Caesar, they represented destiny. The next chapter would take him into Gaul. And there, amid years of warfare and conquest, Julius Caesar would begin writing the story that made him immortal. Chapter 5. The Conquest of Gaul. When Julius Caesar left Rome for Gaul, he was already a successful politician. He had served as consul. He had forged an alliance with some of the most powerful men in the Republic. He had secured an important military command. Yet despite these achievements, he was not yet a legend. That would change in Gaul. Over the next 8 years, Caesar would fight a series of campaigns that transformed both his own destiny and the future of Rome. He would conquer vast territories, defeat powerful enemies, expand Roman influence farther than ever before, and build a reputation so immense that even his political rivals would struggle to contain it. The region known as Gaul covered much of modern-day France, along with parts of Belgium, Switzerland, Germany, and northern Italy. It was not a single nation, nor was it a unified kingdom. Instead, it consisted of numerous tribes, each with its own leaders, customs, and ambitions. Some tribes traded with Rome, others resisted Roman influence. Many fought one another as often as they fought outsiders. To Roman politicians, Gaul represented both opportunity and danger. To Caesar, it represented something even greater, a chance to achieve glory. The first major challenge came in 58 BC. A large tribal migration threatened the stability of territories near Rome's sphere of influence. The movement involved the Helvetii, a people living in what is now Switzerland. Thousands prepared to relocate westward. Roman officials feared the consequences. Caesar acted quickly. Presenting himself as the defender of Roman interests, he mobilized his forces and confronted the migrants. The resulting campaign ended in victory. For Caesar, it was only the beginning. Each success strengthened his position. Each victory increased his fame. And each battle offered new opportunities for expansion. Soon, Caesar faced another threat. A Germanic leader named Ariovistus had established influence within parts of Gaul. Many local tribes viewed him as a growing danger. Once again, Caesar intervened. Marching his legions against Ariovistus, he achieved another significant victory. The campaign enhanced his reputation as a capable commander. It also sent a clear message. Rome's presence in Gaul was growing, and Caesar intended to lead that expansion. Year after year, new conflicts emerged. Some tribes resisted Roman authority. Others sought alliances. Many found themselves caught between competing interests. Caesar consistently used these situations to justify military action. Whenever threats appeared, he responded decisively. Whenever opportunities emerged, he exploited them. His campaigns gradually expanded Roman control across the region, yet victory was never guaranteed. The terrain could be difficult. Supply lines stretched across great distances. Weather often created additional challenges, and many Gallic warriors fought fiercely to defend their homes. Success required more than bravery. It required exceptional leadership. Caesar proved remarkably skilled at inspiring loyalty among his soldiers. He shared hardships with them. He appeared alongside them during dangerous operations. He rewarded courage and recognized achievement. Over time, a powerful bond developed between Caesar and his legions. They trusted him, they followed him, and they increasingly viewed their fortunes as connected to his own. This loyalty would later become one of the most important factors in Roman history. But during the Gallic campaigns, it helped produce a series of extraordinary victories. Roman military discipline played a crucial role. The legions were highly organized. Their training was rigorous. Their engineering capabilities often astonished enemies. When necessary, Roman soldiers could construct roads, bridges, camps, and fortifications with remarkable speed. Caesar frequently used these advantages to outmaneuver opponents. His campaigns demonstrated not only military strength, but also logistical brilliance. Yet Gaul was far from an easy conquest. The tribes repeatedly resisted Roman expansion. Coalitions formed, rebellions erupted, and some leaders proved capable of uniting groups that had previously remained divided. The greatest challenge emerged in 52 BC. A young Arvernian noble named Vercingetorix succeeded where many others had failed. He united numerous Gallic tribes under a common cause. For perhaps the first time, Caesar faced a large-scale resistance movement capable of threatening everything he had achieved. Vercingetorix understood that defeating Rome in open battle would be difficult. Instead, he employed strategies designed to weaken Caesar's forces. Settlements were abandoned. Resources were destroyed. Supplies became harder to obtain. The campaign grew increasingly dangerous. For a moment, it seemed possible that years of Roman progress might collapse. Then came one of the most famous episodes of Caesar's military career, the Siege of Alesia. Vercingetorix and his followers retreated to a fortified hilltop settlement. Rather than launch a direct assault, Caesar devised an extraordinary plan. His soldiers constructed massive defensive works surrounding the settlement: walls, ditches, towers, fortifications stretching for miles. Yet there was another problem. Relief armies were approaching from outside. Caesar now faced enemies, both within and beyond the fortress. His response remains one of the most remarkable engineering achievements in ancient warfare. The Romans built a second line of fortifications facing outward. They effectively created two defensive rings: one to contain those inside Alesia, another to repel those attempting to break the siege. The result was a military masterpiece. After intense fighting, Roman forces prevailed. The relief armies failed. The defenders could no longer continue. Vercingetorix surrendered. According to later accounts, the defeated leader rode out and presented himself before Caesar. Whether every detail of the story is accurate remains uncertain, but its symbolic importance is undeniable. The surrender marked a turning point. Organized resistance in Gaul began to collapse. Rome's victory was becoming inevitable. For Caesar, the consequences were enormous. He had conquered a vast region, expanded Roman territory dramatically, acquired immense wealth, and earned unprecedented military prestige. News of his victories spread throughout the Republic. Citizens celebrated. Supporters praised him. Soldiers admired him. Even those who disliked him could not ignore his achievements. But success created new problems. The more powerful Caesar became, the more alarmed his rivals grew. Back in Rome, political tensions continued to simmer. Many senators worried about the growing influence of military commanders, and no commander seemed more successful than Caesar. His victories had given him resources, popularity, and loyal troops. He was becoming something unusual: a politician backed by military greatness, a general skilled in public relations, a leader capable of commanding both armies and public opinion. In many ways, the conquest of Gaul transformed Caesar from an ambitious statesman into a national phenomenon. His name became known throughout the Roman world. Stories of his campaigns circulated widely. His reputation grew with every victory. And perhaps most importantly, Caesar understood how to ensure those stories reached the public. Because while he conquered Gaul with his legions, he was also preparing another weapon, a weapon made not of iron, but of words. Through carefully crafted writings, Caesar would begin shaping how future generations remembered his achievements. He would become not only the hero of his own campaigns, but also the author of his own legend. And in the next chapter, Julius Caesar begins writing the story that would help make him immortal. Chapter 6. Writing his own legend. By the early 50s BC, Julius Caesar had achieved what many Roman politicians only dreamed of. He had conquered vast territories, won major victories, accumulated enormous wealth, and earned the loyalty of battle-hardened legions. But Caesar understood something that many commanders did not. Winning battles was only half the struggle. The other half was controlling the story. Back in Rome, most citizens would never see the battlefields of Gaul. They would never march with the legions. They would never witness a siege or hear the clash of swords. Everything they knew about the war would come through reports, speeches, rumors, and written accounts. Whoever controlled those accounts controlled public perception. And Caesar intended to control it better than anyone else. As his campaigns continued, he began producing a series of written commentaries describing the war. Today, these writings are known as Time's The Gallic Wars. At first glance, they appear straightforward, calm, measured, almost clinical in tone. Caesar described military operations, diplomatic negotiations, enemy movements, and Roman victories with remarkable clarity. The style was simple enough to be widely understood, yet sophisticated enough to impress educated readers. It was a masterpiece of communication. But these works were more than military reports. They were political tools. Every page strengthened Caesar's reputation. Every victory reinforced his image as Rome's greatest commander. Every challenge highlighted his intelligence and leadership. Perhaps most interestingly, Caesar often wrote about himself in the third person. Rather than saying I ordered or I decided, he wrote Caesar ordered or Caesar decided. The effect was subtle but powerful. It created the impression of objectivity, as though an impartial observer were recording events. Yet Caesar remained the author. He selected what to include, what to emphasize, and what to leave unsaid. The result was one of history's earliest and most successful exercises in political image-making. To Roman readers, Caesar appeared decisive, courageous, and consistently victorious. Defeats were minimized. Mistakes received little attention. Successes dominated the narrative. This does not mean the accounts were entirely false. Modern historians generally agree that many events described in the Gallic War's times occurred. Battles were fought. Campaigns succeeded. Territories were conquered, but Caesar presented those events through a carefully crafted lens. He was telling history and simultaneously shaping it. The timing was no accident. Political tensions in Rome were increasing. Caesar's enemies sought opportunities to undermine him. Some senators worried that he was becoming too powerful. Others feared the loyalty he inspired among his troops. Many questioned what he might do once his command ended. The more successful Caesar became, the more dangerous he appeared to his rivals. His writings served as a counterattack. While opponents criticized him in the Senate, Caesar spoke directly to the Roman people. Through his commentaries, citizens could follow his campaigns almost as they unfolded. His victories became public events. His achievements became national achievements. His reputation grew stronger with every new report. Meanwhile, conditions within the First Triumvirate were beginning to deteriorate. The alliance that had once united Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus was showing signs of strain. In 54 BC, tragedy struck. Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, died during childbirth. Her death removed an important personal bond connecting the two leaders. For years, the marriage had helped maintain trust between them. Now that connection was gone. The political consequences were significant. Without Julia, Pompey and Caesar gradually drifted apart. Then another blow followed. In 53 BC, Crassus launched a military campaign against the Parthian Empire in the east. The expedition ended in disaster. At the Battle of Carrhae, Roman forces suffered a devastating defeat. Crassus himself was killed. His death shattered the balance that had sustained the triumvirate. 3 powerful men had become 2, and the remaining 2 were increasingly moving toward conflict. Back in Rome, Pompey remained enormously respected. He was still one of the Republic's most celebrated commanders. Many senators began viewing him as a counterweight to Caesar's growing influence. Gradually, political lines hardened. Supporters chose sides. The atmosphere grew more tense. Yet, while these developments unfolded, Caesar continued building his legend. His military achievements seemed almost unstoppable. His writings circulated widely. His fame reached extraordinary levels. For ordinary Romans, Caesar had become something larger than life, a victorious general operating on distant frontiers, a defender of Roman interests, a man who seemed favored by fortune itself. But fame has a way of creating fear. The more Caesar's reputation expanded, the more his opponents wondered what would happen when he returned home. Would he quietly surrender his command? Would he resume life as an ordinary politician? Or would he use his military power to reshape the Republic? No one knew. perhaps not even Caesar himself. Yet the questions became impossible to ignore. His enemies watched nervously, his allies prepared carefully, and Caesar continued writing. Every report from Gaul added another layer to the legend. Every campaign enhanced his prestige. Every victory widened the gap between Caesar and nearly every other politician in Rome. By the end of the Gallic Wars, he was no longer simply a successful commander. He was a symbol, a hero to many, a threat to others, and a figure whose name was now known throughout the Roman world. But Caesar was not finished. Soon, he would push Roman power beyond the boundaries many considered possible. He would cross rivers that marked the edges of civilization, launch expeditions into lands few Romans had ever seen, and demonstrate once again that limits existed largely to be challenged. The legend was growing, and so was the fear surrounding it. In the next chapter, Julius Caesar reaches beyond Gaul itself, crossing the Rhine and sailing to Britain, expanding both Rome's horizons and his own reputation. Chapter 7. Britain, the Rhine, and the Edge of the World. By the middle of the Gallic Wars, Julius Caesar had already achieved more military success than most Roman commanders could hope for in a lifetime. Gaul was steadily falling under Roman control. His victories had made him famous. His writings had spread his reputation across the Republic, and his soldiers had come to trust him completely. For many leaders, that would have been enough. But Caesar rarely settled for enough. He was always looking beyond the next horizon, beyond the next challenge, beyond the limits that others accepted. To understand Caesar's ambitions, it is important to understand the Roman view of the world. Romans believed they stood at the center of civilization. Beyond their borders lay lands that were often poorly understood and only partially explored. Maps were incomplete. Knowledge was limited. Rumors frequently filled the gaps. For many Romans, regions beyond the frontier existed almost as much in imagination as in reality. Caesar recognized the power of exploring these unknown spaces. Every expedition into distant territory increased his prestige. Every bold achievement strengthened his image as a commander unlike any other. And so, in 55 BC, he turned his attention toward the Rhine. The great river marked an important boundary in Roman thinking. Beyond it lived numerous Germanic tribes. For generations, these peoples had occupied a unique place in Roman imagination. They were often portrayed as fierce warriors, independent and difficult to control. Some had already crossed into territories closer to Rome, contributing to instability and conflict. Caesar decided to send a message, not merely through diplomacy, but through action. Rather than simply defending Roman territory, he chose to cross the Rhine itself. The challenge was enormous. The river was wide, powerful, and difficult to navigate. Many commanders would have relied on boats. Caesar chose a more dramatic approach. His engineers constructed a massive wooden bridge. According to his own account, the structure was completed in only a matter of days. Whether the exact timeline is entirely accurate remains debated by historians, but there is little doubt that the achievement impressed contemporaries. The bridge represented far more than a practical crossing. It was a statement. Rome could reach places previously considered inaccessible. Caesar could accomplish what others thought impossible. Once across the Rhine, Roman forces conducted operations designed to demonstrate strength and discourage future threats. The campaign itself was relatively brief. Caesar had no immediate intention of conquering Germania. The symbolic value of the crossing mattered more than permanent occupation. When the operation concluded, the bridge was dismantled. But its impact remained. Throughout Rome, people talked about the commander who had crossed one of Europe's great rivers and returned victorious. For Caesar, the expedition was another triumph of image as much as military strategy. Yet even this remarkable achievement failed to satisfy his ambition. Across the sea lay another mystery, an island known to the Romans as Britannia. Britain occupied a strange place in Roman knowledge. Merchants knew of it. Stories circulated about it. But few Romans had seen it firsthand. To many citizens of the Republic, Britain seemed distant and almost mythical, a land at the edge of the known world. For Caesar, that made it irresistible. Later in 55 BC, he launched an expedition across the English Channel. The undertaking was risky. Roman forces had limited knowledge of the region, weather conditions were unpredictable, and transporting an army across open water presented significant logistical challenges. Nevertheless, Caesar proceeded. The crossing itself became one of the most famous moments of his career. Roman ships approached unfamiliar shores. Soldiers prepared to enter territory no Roman army had previously invaded. Ancient accounts describe initial difficulties. The landing was contested. Conditions proved challenging, but eventually Roman forces established a foothold. The campaign was limited in scope. Caesar did not attempt a full conquest. Instead, the expedition served primarily as a demonstration of Roman reach and capability. The following year, he returned with a larger force. This second expedition penetrated farther inland. Several local rulers submitted or negotiated with Roman authorities. Once again, Caesar achieved his immediate objectives. Yet Britain remained unconquered. Permanent Roman occupation would not occur until nearly a century later. Still, the significance of Caesar's expeditions was enormous. For the first time, Rome had projected military power across the Channel. The achievement captured public imagination. Stories spread throughout the Republic. The commander who had conquered Gaul had now ventured beyond it. He had crossed the Rhine, sailed to Britain, and returned successfully. To many Romans, these accomplishments seemed extraordinary. Caesar was no longer simply winning wars. He was expanding the boundaries of the known world. His fame grew accordingly. Supporters praised his courage. Writers celebrated his achievements. Citizens followed reports of his campaigns with fascination. The image of Caesar as an unstoppable commander became increasingly powerful. But while his reputation flourished abroad, political realities in Rome were changing. The alliance that had once protected his interests was crumbling. Crassus was dead. Julia was gone. Relations with Pompey continued to deteriorate. Many senators who feared Caesar's growing influence began drawing closer to Pompey. The political center of gravity was shifting, and Caesar knew it. Every victory in Gaul increased his prestige, yet every victory also increased anxiety among his rivals. The very successes that strengthened his position simultaneously deepened suspicion. Opponents asked difficult questions. What would happen when Caesar's command ended? Would he return as a private citizen? Would he face political prosecution? Would he surrender the army that had become fiercely loyal to him? Or would he refuse? No one could predict the answer, but the possibility of confrontation grew more real with every passing year. Meanwhile, Caesar continued accumulating something almost as valuable as military victories: experience. He had commanded armies across vast distances, managed complex logistics, negotiated with tribal leaders, directed massive engineering projects, and led soldiers through some of the most challenging campaigns of the age. He was becoming more than a successful general. He was becoming one of the most capable leaders in the Roman world, and that made him increasingly dangerous, because power in Rome rarely remained balanced for long. The Republic's institutions had been built to prevent any one man from becoming too dominant. Yet Caesar's achievements were pushing against those limits. His popularity rivaled that of Pompey. His military successes surpassed nearly everyone else. And his ambitions showed no signs of diminishing. The frontier campaigns had expanded his legend, but they had also brought him closer to a collision with Rome itself. Soon, the question would no longer be whether conflict was coming. The question would be who would strike first. For years, Caesar had conquered foreign enemies. Now, his greatest challenge was beginning to emerge much closer to home. The republic that had made him powerful was increasingly afraid of the power he possessed. And before long, Julius Caesar would face a choice that would change history forever. A choice centered on a small river in northern Italy. A river whose name would echo through the centuries. The Rubicon. Chapter 8. Cleopatra and Egypt. By the time Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, the Roman Republic was already being torn apart by civil war. The alliance that had once united Caesar and Pompey was gone. Years of political tension had erupted into open conflict. The Republic's two most powerful men now stood on opposite sides of a struggle that would determine the future of Rome. For Caesar, victory required speed, determination, and relentless pursuit. After a series of successful campaigns, Pompey found himself increasingly isolated. The commander, once celebrated as Pompey the Great, was now fleeing for his life. His destination was Egypt. It was a logical choice. For decades, Rome and Egypt had maintained close relations. The kingdom possessed immense wealth, strategic importance, and a ruling dynasty eager to maintain Roman favor. Pompey hoped he would find support there. Instead, he found betrayal. When Pompey arrived on the Egyptian coast in 48 BC, members of the royal court made a decision they believed would please Caesar. Seeking favor with the apparent victor, they arranged Pompey's assassination. The former ally and rival of Julius Caesar was murdered before he could reach safety. His death shocked the Roman world. Yet when Caesar arrived shortly afterward and learned what had happened, his reaction was not what the conspirators expected. Ancient sources suggest that Caesar was deeply disturbed by Pompey's fate. The two men had been allies, family members through marriage, and although they had become enemies in war, Pompey remained one of Rome's greatest figures. The sight of his former ally's death reportedly moved Caesar to tears. Whether every detail of these accounts is accurate is impossible to know, but the larger point remains important. Caesar had not come to Egypt seeking Pompey's murder. He had come to defeat him, politically and militarily. Now that chapter of the conflict was over, but Egypt itself was about to become a new challenge. The kingdom Caesar entered was experiencing its own crisis. The ruling dynasty, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, was locked in a bitter struggle for power. Two siblings stood at the center of the conflict, Ptolemy the 13th and Cleopatra the 7th. Both claimed the right to rule Egypt. Both sought allies, and both understood that Roman support could determine the outcome. Of the two, Cleopatra would become one of history's most famous women, intelligent, ambitious, highly educated, and politically astute. She spoke multiple languages and possessed a deep understanding of diplomacy. Unlike the romanticized versions often portrayed in later centuries, Cleopatra's greatest strengths were political rather than purely personal. She understood power, and she understood how to secure it. At the time of Caesar's arrival, Cleopatra had been forced from Alexandria by supporters of her brother. Her position appeared weak, but she refused to surrender. Ancient writers preserved one of the most famous stories from this period. According to tradition, Cleopatra arranged to be secretly brought into Caesar's presence, concealed within bedding or a large sack of fabric. The dramatic tale has survived for centuries. Whether every detail is true remains uncertain, but the essential fact is clear. Cleopatra successfully gained access to Caesar, and once she did, she changed the course of events. The meeting marked the beginning of a powerful political partnership. Caesar quickly recognized Cleopatra's abilities. She was intelligent, capable, and potentially useful in stabilizing Egypt under a ruler favorable to Roman interests. Cleopatra, in turn, recognized an opportunity. Support from Caesar could restore her throne. Their goals aligned, and together they formed an alliance that would shape both Egyptian and Roman history. The situation soon escalated into violence. Supporters of Ptolemy opposed Caesar's involvement in Egyptian affairs. Tensions erupted into conflict within Alexandria. For months, Caesar and his forces found themselves caught in a dangerous struggle. Despite being far from Rome and commanding relatively limited numbers, Caesar managed to maintain control. The fighting became known as the Alexandrian War. It was one of the more precarious moments of his career. At times, his position appeared uncertain. Yet once again, Caesar demonstrated the qualities that had carried him through countless crises: adaptability, boldness, and confidence under pressure. Eventually, reinforcements arrived. The opposition was defeated. Ptolemy XIII died during the conflict, and Cleopatra emerged victorious. She was restored to power as Queen of Egypt. For Caesar, the outcome represented both a strategic and political success. Egypt remained stable. A friendly ruler occupied the throne, and Roman influence in the region increased significantly. Yet the relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra soon became the subject of endless fascination. Ancient writers discussed it. Roman politicians debated it. Later generations transformed it into one of history's most famous romances. The truth is likely more complex. There is little doubt that a personal relationship developed between them. There is also evidence that Cleopatra later gave birth to a son, known as Caesarion, whom she claimed was Caesar's child. But reducing their connection solely to romance misses the larger reality. Their partnership was deeply political. Both leaders benefited from the alliance. Both strengthened their positions through cooperation, and both understood the value of maintaining the relationship. For many Romans, however, Cleopatra represented something troubling. She was a foreign queen, a monarch, and a symbol of Eastern power. As Caesar's influence continued growing, some critics worried about the implications of his association with her. The concerns were not yet dominant, but they existed, and they would become increasingly important in later years. Meanwhile, Caesar spent time traveling along the Nile with Cleopatra, observing the kingdom he had helped secure. The journey reinforced Egypt's importance within the Mediterranean world. Its wealth was extraordinary, its culture ancient, its strategic value immense. For Caesar, Egypt represented both opportunity and stability at a moment when much of the Roman world remained consumed by conflict. Yet despite the victories in Alexandria, his work was far from finished. Enemies still existed. Civil war still raged, and the future of Rome remained unresolved. Caesar could not remain in Egypt indefinitely. Soon, he would leave Cleopatra behind and return to the struggle for control of the Republic. More battles awaited. More victories would follow. And with each success, Caesar's power would grow. But so would the fears surrounding him, because every triumph brought him closer to a question that neither he nor Rome could avoid forever. How much power could one man possess before the Republic ceased to be a republic at all? The answer was approaching, and it would begin with a decision made on the banks of a small river, a decision that would become one of the most famous moments in history. The crossing of the Rubicon. Chapter 9. Cross the Rubicon. By the end of the 50s BC, Julius Caesar stood at the height of his military fame. Gaul had been conquered. His legions were loyal. His victories had made him one of the most celebrated figures in the Roman world. Yet despite all his success, Caesar faced a growing problem. The farther he rose, the more dangerous his position became. Back in Rome, the political landscape had changed dramatically. The First Triumvirate was gone. Crassus was dead. Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, was gone as well. The personal bonds that had once held the alliance together had disappeared, and Pompey, once Caesar's partner, was increasingly aligned with the Senate. The Republic was becoming divided into opposing camps. On one side stood Caesar. On the other stood many of Rome's most influential senators and their increasingly powerful ally, Pompey. At the center of the conflict was a deceptively simple question. What would happen when Caesar's military command expired? Under Roman law, governors and generals were expected to surrender their armies before returning to Rome. Once they did so, they became private citizens again. The rule existed for an important reason. Rome feared military leaders with too much power. The Republic had long tried to prevent generals from using armies to influence politics, but Caesar's situation was complicated. His enemies had accumulated over the years. Many senators deeply resented his rise. Others feared his popularity. Some were determined to destroy his political career. If Caesar returned to Rome without military protection, he could face prosecution, financial ruin, or political exile. His opponents insisted that he obey the law. Caesar argued that he deserved the opportunity to stand for office while retaining legal protections. Negotiations dragged on. Proposals were exchanged. Compromises were discussed. But trust had vanished. Each side suspected the other of acting in bad faith. As tensions increased, moderate voices struggled to maintain influence. The Republic drifted steadily toward confrontation. Meanwhile, Caesar remained with his army in northern Italy. His soldiers had fought beside him for years. Together they had endured hardship, danger, and countless battles. Their loyalty was extraordinary. Many veterans viewed Caesar not merely as a commander, but as the architect of their fortunes. The bond between general and army had become one of the strongest political forces in Rome, and everyone knew it. The Senate feared it. Pompey respected it. Caesar understood its significance. Then, in early 49 BC, events reached a breaking point. The Senate issued demands that Caesar surrender his command. Failure to comply would effectively place him in opposition to the Republic. The message was clear: submit, or be treated as an enemy. Caesar now faced the most important decision of his life. The choice before him was stark. He could obey, dismiss his army, return to Rome as a private citizen, and trust that his enemies would treat him fairly. Or he could resist, keep his command, and challenge the authority of the Senate itself. Neither option was without risk. One threatened his political future. The other threatened the future of the Republic. For days, uncertainty hung over northern Italy. Supporters and opponents alike waited anxiously. What would Caesar do? Would he compromise? Would he retreat? Would he gamble everything? Then came the moment that would echo through history. Separating Caesar's province from Italy proper was a relatively small river, the Rubicon. By law, Roman generals were forbidden from crossing it with an army. The restriction symbolized a crucial principle. Military force belonged outside Italy. Political authority belonged within it. Crossing the river with troops would represent a direct challenge to the established order. Caesar knew exactly what was at stake. Ancient writers describe him pausing before the crossing, reflecting on the consequences, understanding that once the decision was made, there would be no turning back. Whether every detail of these accounts is accurate remains impossible to verify, but the larger reality is undeniable. Caesar understood the gravity of the moment. If he crossed the Rubicon, civil war would become likely, perhaps inevitable. According to tradition, he then spoke a phrase that has survived for more than 2,000 years. The die is cast. With that, Caesar and his forces crossed the river. The act itself was simple. The consequences were enormous. A small stream had become the dividing line between peace and war. By crossing it, Caesar effectively declared that the dispute would no longer be settled through negotiation alone. The Republic's political crisis had entered a new phase. News spread rapidly. Shock swept through Rome. Senators scrambled to react. Allies reassessed their positions. Opponents prepared for conflict. The decision forced everyone to choose sides. There could be no neutrality. Pompey and many senators quickly left Rome. The city was not prepared for immediate defense, nor did they expect Caesar's advance to be so swift. As he moved south, many communities opened their gates without resistance. Supporters joined him. Opposition often melted away. The image of Caesar marching on Rome became one of the defining moments of ancient history. To his enemies, he was a rebel, a threat to constitutional government, a man willing to place personal ambition above the Republic. To his supporters, he was defending himself against political persecution, a leader refusing to surrender to corrupt rivals. Both sides believed they were protecting Rome, and that conviction made compromise nearly impossible. The tragedy of the crisis lay in the fact that neither faction saw itself as the villain. Each believed the other had pushed events too far. Each claimed to act in the Republic's best interests. Yet regardless of intentions, the result was the same: civil war. The institutions that had governed Rome for centuries were now unable to contain the ambitions of its most powerful citizens. Armies would decide what politics could not. For Caesar, the crossing of the Rubicon represented a point of no return. His fate was now inseparable from victory. If he won, he could reshape the Republic. If he lost, everything would be destroyed: his career, his reputation, perhaps even his life. The gamble was extraordinary, but Caesar had always embraced risk, and now he was risking more than ever before. The man who had conquered Gaul was about to confront a far greater challenge: not foreign tribes, not distant kingdoms, but fellow Romans. The war ahead would pit Roman against Roman, friend against friend, former allies against one another, and when it ended, the Republic would never be the same. Because the struggle that began at the Rubicon was not simply a contest between Caesar and Pompey, it was a battle over the future of Rome itself. The next chapter takes us into that conflict, a civil war that would transform Julius Caesar from a powerful general into the dominant figure of the Roman world. Chapter 10, Civil War against Rome. 83-0, 92-0. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, he did more than march an army into Italy. He shattered the illusion that the Roman Republic could still resolve its deepest conflicts through politics alone. The crisis that had been building for years was now out in the open. Rome was at war with itself, and there was no turning back. As Caesar advanced southward, panic spread among many members of the Senate. Pompey and his supporters had expected resistance to slow Caesar's progress. Instead, events unfolded with startling speed. Cities opened their gates. Local leaders switched sides. Many officials hesitated to oppose a commander whose reputation seemed larger than life. Before long, Pompey made a difficult decision. Rather than attempt an immediate defense of Rome, he withdrew from Italy. Accompanied by senators, allies, and loyal forces, he crossed into Greece. There, he intended to gather resources, recruit armies, and prepare for a larger confrontation. To many observers, the decision appeared shocking. The Republic's most celebrated general had abandoned Rome itself, yet Pompey believed time favored him. He controlled significant resources in the eastern Mediterranean. He possessed powerful allies. And he expected that Caesar, despite his successes, would eventually face overwhelming opposition. Caesar saw things differently. The rapid collapse of resistance in Italy gave him an enormous advantage. Without fighting a major battle, he had gained control of the Roman heartland, but victory remained far from certain. Pompey still commanded considerable support. Many of Rome's wealthiest and most influential families stood with him. The conflict was only beginning. For the next several years, the Mediterranean world became a battlefield. Caesar moved relentlessly. His strategy depended on speed. Again and again, he sought to keep opponents off balance. He understood that hesitation could be fatal. One of his first priorities was securing the western provinces. Before confronting Pompey directly, he marched into Spain, where Pompeian forces controlled important territories. The campaign was swift and effective. Caesar reportedly summarized the situation with characteristic confidence. He had gone, he said, to fight an army without a leader before returning